Hello, I'm Jasmine Buck. I'm a senior clinical scientist in microbiology. I'm nearing the end of the HSST programme, so soon to qualify as a consultant clinical scientist. And I currently work in Frimley Health NHS Foundation Trust. I'd like to thank the National School for the opportunity to give this short talk covering some of the activities that we've put in place in our micro network to support STP trainees. So I work in part of a larger pathology network, as I'm sure most of you do too, but we're relatively new to training STPs and HSSTs in microbiology. Currently have myself as a Year 5 HSST trainee, a fellow HSST in Year 3, 3 STPs in Year 2, and a biomedical scientist who's currently doing clinical scientist equivalency. So there's a little bit of a group of us now coming through. I'm giving this talk really as an HSST trainee and from the opinion of things that I found helpful and beneficial in my training and from the feedback of some of the STPs currently. Not going to go through all of these activities, just a select few. So firstly, I'd like to discuss the clinical scientist days. So these are relatively new. We have them roughly twice a year, and the trainees, so HSST and STP trainees, set aside the whole day, and we meet together on a site, face to face, and build up a little bit of an agenda that's usually based upon whatever the needs are of the trainees at the time, and use this day to really focus on anything that we think it would be beneficial. So things like competencies, we might actually put aside some time to complete specific competencies or parts of competencies, and also as an opportunity to ask specific questions around specific standards and curriculum items. We also do a bit of shared learning, so any kind of ideas for future placements, discuss evidence ideas, make suggestions and kind of reflections on the previous placements that the STPs have been on since the last clinical scientist day. So this might be that, for instance, a trainee has found a particular placement very beneficial, and actually they would suggest maybe going back there for another stint, or just reflecting that future trainees may not need quite so long in another placement. It also might be that there could be clinical audits or a particular ward round that a trainee has found very, very beneficial and used as lots of evidence for across many competencies, and sort of those sorts of reflections of how they've found different placements for future learning, really. We also use the clinical scientist day as a bit of a team building exercise. So often trainees are working in silos across networks and on various placements, and it can be quite lonely. So we just use this day, some of the day as a bit of a team building time to strengthen the group really and the team. And this kind of feeds into the final point, which is about really strengthening the identity of the clinical scientist team, kind of bringing us all together and making sure that we're all having a very sort of similar experiences, and nobody's falling behind, and everybody feels comfortable with the training that they're receiving, and we can learn from one another. So that's the clinical scientist days in a nutshell. One of the other ideas that I found quite useful is a SharePoint hub. So this idea was really born out of the need to generate a cross-site accessible resource library, a kind of a learning repository, really. Many of you may have used SharePoint on Teams before for other clinical groups or networks. It's essentially on Microsoft Teams, it's an option that you can create kind of a website style portal and then invite people to access it. So it's very easy to set up, and you can just add trainees as they join and when they complete. Certainly from my STP experience, I often found it difficult to know exactly where the learning resources were and where they were available and where to find key information that I needed for my training, especially if you're coming into the NHS cold as an STP trainee. It's a very useful way of just putting everything in one place as a go-to resource. So this is an example of what we have as our homepage at the moment. So you can see there's hyperlinks to different areas. There's links to the curriculum and also some events that STPs and trainees might be interested in signing up to. We also have a CPD and learning resource section where there are links to different websites, blogs, quality workshops and webinars, standards. We also have some links to interesting papers or trials that the STPs should kind of be getting familiar with and knowing about. And also an interesting things section. So this is podcasts and YouTube channels, books and other things that people have suggested to kind of keep the interest going and read around the subject. There's also a section on competencies and standards. So again, it's just kind of a reference point for when the trainees are thinking about what to generate or put on their portfolios as evidence, and just to remind them that there's lots of different things that could be used. There's also some tips about uploading the competencies and also some more specific training activity suggestions. So again, this is quite specific to microbiology, but for instance, there's an antimicrobial curriculum section and we've put on some suggestions for laboratory and clinical activities to ensure that the trainees are getting the experiences that they need. So that's the SharePoint hub. Now I'd just like to talk a little bit about Journal Club, which is obviously not a revolutionary idea in itself. Many places have lots of journal clubs and they are a great source of learning and shared learning, really. But just to point out really that obviously it can be quite difficult to keep the momentum of Journal Club going. And so this is really just to point out some of the ways I've noticed that we can keep the momentum going, really. So first off is it is STP led. So this gives the trainees opportunity to obviously take responsibility for running the journal club and keeping it organised, assigning people the weeks that they're going to present. It's weekly, so this is kind of a little and often, find easier to maintain, and everybody has the option to pick any topic that they like. So it can be obviously journals and interesting papers or trials or case studies, as well as specific organisms or diseases. See, again, that's sort of micro specific, but we also use the journal club times if STPs have exams coming up. So we might use a slot the week before to kind of use it as a revision session or questions and go through bits that they're worried about or want clarification of, so that we keep the journal club slot as very relevant to them, and it's not, try to make it not an extra burden or an extra piece of work that they feel that they have to do, but is beneficial to their training. Also, we do encourage cake to be eaten, and this keeps the consultants turning up as well, which is really helpful. So just some summary points and observations. That really, obviously, you need to try ideas and just see what works for the discipline or network or trust that you're working in, and that many of the ideas can be actually trainee-led. And then that in themselves can be used as evidence. So the trainees using organising, teaching, taking ownership and leadership of these activities. And also just getting feedback from the trainees. So I think this is important, just to make sure that nobody's wasting their time and that everything that you're doing is relevant and beneficial, really, and that you can keep honing it in and reflecting upon those practices and making sure it's the best it can be, really. So I guess that's kind of my musings of shared practice. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope it's been of interest and beneficial. Thank you.